Welcome to our online author talk. I'm your host, Lisa, and this week Suffolk Libraries have been holding a series of workshops and events that have been inspired by the British Library's Chinese and British exhibition. And this evening, I am absolutely delighted that Julie May will be here and talking to us about her just wonderful book, Happy Families, which was chosen by the curators of the British Library. So welcome, Julie, and thank you so much for joining us.
No, thank you. Thank you for asking me. I feel so jealous of people who live in Suffolk and close to the library in Ipswich, because you've got this wonderful series of events for the Chinese New Year spreading from yesterday to the weekend. And I am very pleased that you've asked me to be a small part of it, but also very jealous I don't get to go to any of the events in the library. So yes, thank you.
It's been amazing. I mean, yesterday we had calligraphy painting, and it was just amazing. There was children partaking. There was like 30 people there. It was fabulous. But one of the things we touched on, Julie, is you've actually checked out the British Library exhibition. So I'm jealous about that because I've not made it to it yet. What was that like? And what was it like seeing your book there as part of that?
Well, it was so strange because really it's you who's made me aware of the book being there, and I thought, oh wow, this is brilliant. So I went in the first week. I've never been to the British Library before or that part of London before, so it was like all very scary and intimidating. The British Library is well worth a visit for the other exhibitions, but I did that thing where you go up to the top floor and you go, where's my exhibition? Where's me? Where's my stuff? And then you have to come back down. So it took me ages to find it, and it's on the ground floor. And it's quite a small exhibition, but when you get to the bit where you see your own book, it's sort of a bit surreal. But it's amazing because there are other books written by East Asian authors there, some of whom I've met virtually, and that's been brilliant. The other thing that came as a surprise to me is that when I walked past another part of the exhibition, there was a photograph of my grandfather, which had been supplied by my cousin.
That must have been extraordinary.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting that. So my grandfather and a photograph of his wife, his second wife, who isn't my grandmother officially. And it was just like, he looked so dapper and young. And it was just strange. You see your own grandparents looking so young. Obviously the books, the books are all displayed in a little round bit, and then you can like turn it like a Lazy Susan and look at your book, which I suppose is like a Chinese restaurant. And it was just ever so strange. And the other thing that happened was that when I was leaving and I went to the British Library bookshop, I thought, oh, would it be really, really poncy to say, can I sign my book for you to sell? So I stood there for a bit and dithered for ages. And then I said to the sort of like hipster guy on the till, oh, do you think your manager would like me to sign some of the books? And he was like, gee, I don't know. I'm not sure. But eventually he called the manager over and she said, yes, you can sign some. So I signed 4 of them, thinking, well, if I sign 4, it'll be okay, because apparently once books have been signed, they can't send them back to the publisher. So I thought I'll just sign 4 and see what happens. So if anybody goes to the exhibition now and there's a signed book from me there, that means they haven't been selling very well. But hopefully those 4 books have gone by now, because it's been about 2 months.
I bet they've been snapped up, and we've actually got the big Chinese New Year celebration on Saturday night, and we've got a raffle, and Julie has very kindly signed a book for us for that as well, which is wonderful. I really love your book, Julie, and I really love that you see that everybody has a story. It's kind of one of the things that you talked about. What is it about that fascinates you, people's lives?
I think I prefer looking at the detail of people's lives rather than, I mean, there are big stories and murders, I don't know, kidnappings, all the usual, Lee Child. And I love those books. I couldn't ever write one. It's like the scaffolding and the twists and the turns. So I just thought, where can I find something that I can write about? And it did take a long time, because I did come to actually writing things quite late, writing them to a publishable standard quite late. But I realized that the interesting things are the things that you see around town or notice, just tiny, extraordinary things in the everyday. And I've noticed there are other writers like David Sedaris who says I think he does a little writing course online, and he says, what you have to do is you just have to watch people and see what they do. And there are stories there, you see all sorts, and you can, and also if you're really nosy, you can overhear people's conversations, listen to them. Even like today, for example, I was walking down the street and I could hear two people behind me starting to have a bit of a juicy conversation. So I started walking really slowly until they turned off, and I was like, I'll have to make the rest of that up if I do anything. But yes, so you just have to keep your eyes and ears open and get the minutiae of life into your story. Well, that's what I do anyway.
I love that. And we do have a lot of people who watch our talks who are writers, want to be aspiring to be published. And quite a few authors like you have said the same kind of thing. It's like you are people observers, you know, the conversations on the bus and like what that might lead to, and the phone call that you only hear one side of can be absolutely fascinating to listen to. When you're saying about observation, when did you become aware of the mass observation diary?
I can't remember. Oh, probably. The thing is, as an unpublished writer, the mass observation diary, I've been doing it for about 8 years. So before I got published. So they don't always take they don't always take entries, but it's just a day in May, sort of ordinary day, where you write down in detail all the things you've done. And they do like to have children and people of all ages do it. And I don't know if people remember, a few years ago, there was a programme that Victoria Wood made, and she found the inspiration for that from a diary that was in the mass observation diary. Anyway, sometimes even now when I'm researching a book and I think, oh, what did people have for their tea back in 1973? It's quite hard to find that sort of information because people only write about the big stuff. And it's the small stuff that's the everyday stuff of your life, isn't it? So if you want to find out what people had for their tea in 1973, mass observation diaries is a place to look. I was also determined that when I die, I'm going to leave a bit of writing behind for somebody else to read. And so I was determined to submit to the mass observation diary, because at that time there was no guarantee of being published or anything of the sort. And I felt that was what I wanted to do. I wanted to leave a bit of me behind. And even if it's boring, somebody will have to put up with it in, I know, 21, 23.
I think it's all fascinating.
Everybody should do it.
I mean, people are just really fascinating creatures, all the different things we do. And even that, what you said, like that resource is something that's really interesting for writers to look at. And I want to touch upon your amazing book, Happy Families. And obviously it's not just about a family, but obviously that's a big drive in the book, but they run a Chinese takeaway together. Now that's something that's obviously in a small Welsh town. So that's obviously something you can relate to, Julie.
Well, yes, as you can see, this is the takeaway setting. And I'm afraid being a published author doesn't mean that you're so rich you can give up your day job, unfortunately. So this is still my main occupation. Yes, I wanted to write about, because I felt that somebody like me wasn't really seen. I mean, it's about 3 generations of a Chinese immigrant family, like my family. And we're here in Wales, it's a rural setting. People don't tend to think of diversity in a rural setting, but perhaps they should, because it does happen. So that was the main impetus. I wanted somebody like me to appear in a book. And the strange thing is that I don't know whether these things just happen in the air or it's the zeitgeist, but obviously when I went to that exhibition in the British Library, there were several books about contemporary Chinese families living in the UK. So I don't know whether it was just, I'm just pleased to be a part of that little wave. And hopefully in future years, people won't think to say, oh, there's a little wave of Chinese writers or whatever. It'll just be out there, and Chinese writers will just be there with everybody else. Welsh writers, Scottish writers, writers from Suffolk. So yeah, I wanted to show something that people hadn't seen before. So that was the main impetus, really. And we're lucky to be living in a time where people want to see different people as well. During one of the talks I went to before, a lady said, yes, I tried to write a book a few years ago set in Cardiff, and she was Welsh. And And the publisher said, oh, nobody wants to read about people in Cardiff. They only want to read about people in London. So I'm glad that we're in a time now where people are prepared to look at stories from different parts, even of the UK. So that's something I wanted to do, really.
And what you just said, something I actually wanted to ask you, and we did have a question about it from someone who's a budding writer about how you persevere, like when it, and you know, sometimes it doesn't magically happen overnight. Sometimes you do get the knockbacks. So, you know, how do you continue with the belief in what you're doing? Like, how do you persevere trying to be published?
I think everybody has their knockback. It depends on how far along you are, but if you break it down into like small goals and you think, I'm going to have an idea, and then I'm going to write like a sentence, and then a paragraph, and then a page, and a chapter. So that's the writing part. And sometimes you will, I have to say that writing is probably the least environmentally sound job you can have, because you write 5,000 words and you look at it and you go, 3,000 of those are rubbish. So you cut them out, but you keep them somewhere. And it is useful because sometimes in my book, for example, towards the end of the book, Amy, the main character, and her friend, they appear briefly. They were colleagues when they worked together in Cardiff. Now, I wrote reams and reams of things about what they did on nights out and who they met up with. None of that is in the book, but I know what they did. I know what their life was like behind the scenes, in the same way that you sort of know, for example, that your dad, I don't know, always takes his socks off and leaves them in front of the television. But you never tell anybody that. It's these things that you know about your dad, you know about your family, they enrich how you feel about them. And that's the same with writing. You write a lot and you think, this is rubbish, but it's all useful. And then when you get to the stage where you think you can let other people see, oh, that's the other main thing. When I first started writing, I used to call it my dirty secret because I didn't tell anybody else about it. So I just write away, and there was nobody. I think before the internet age, it was very difficult to find somebody local to yourself, because if there weren't any writers in the local area, there was nobody to share it with. And now that there are online writing schools and online writing communities, you can share it with other people and get feedback. Not all feedback is equal, but it is useful to be able to share it with other people. And then when you get to the stage where you think you'd like to send it out to agents and all that sort of information is online, there'll be knockbacks, there'll be ignorings. I remember saying to my friend once when we were submitting, I wish there was something like Tinder for agents, and then we could just go, no. And they probably think the same for us as well. But it's really hard. There's a lot of knockbacks. You have to develop a very thick skin.
And I think all of this is just really fantastic advice for those that are watching, that are writing now, want someday to be published. And I really love, Julie, what you said about the characters, and that, you know, they put the socks in front of the fire or leave their handbag at the door on the kitchen table. And I think, you know, your characters, I found really, they felt real to me. They felt really realistic. And honestly, not everyone's good at that as an author. They might still have a published book, but they might be good at other aspects of writing, like being on tender hooks, but their character development isn't necessarily there. And yours was, it was gorgeous. They were like real people. So I makes sense to me that you know all these other things about them, because somehow you can kind of feel them as a whole person. Did they feel real to you? And are they based loosely on anyone, people you know?
They are based very, very loosely. I suppose the main character I always think of as the brainy, good-looking version of me, the witty, good-looking version of me. So she was a little bit like I was when I was her age. It's strange, you should say, because some of the characters are people I've sort of met. When we look at the sections in the care home, that was inspired by a man. I was just walking up the street a long time ago, probably over 20 years ago, and he just stopped me and said, I'm 94, you know. And then we stopped and had a conversation. He told me about his life. And I thought, oh, wow, I'd like some old guy in a care home, because he lived in like sheltered accommodation, like the sheltered accommodation in the book. I was like, oh, I could write about an old guy like that. And I think he became the Walter character to a certain extent in the end. So yes, you get into, but you must never, ever have somebody, like if you've broken up with somebody and they've treated you badly, you must never put them in your book wholesale. You must always change them a little bit, and you must never use their actual name when you fictionalize them. But yes, it is, sometimes it's a nice bit of revenge to do something horrible to somebody who's cross
that you don't like in real life.
Yeah.
Did anyone in your friends or family read the book and go, is that supposed to be me? Did
No.
anyone see themselves in the characters?
I don't think they did. Anybody who was in the book didn't see themselves in the characters, and anybody who wasn't did. I do feel a bit
Brilliant
now, because in the very opening chapters, there's a visit to a fruit wholesaler, and there's an accusation that his stock isn't very good quality, and there is a fruit wholesaler who supplies my business, and his fruit is always of a good quality, but obviously it made him look a bit iffy, so I felt bad about that.
Oh, bless.
We've never spoken about it, but we sort of looked at each other and it's all okay, and I fictionalized him and it's not the same person. But yes, you have to be careful, because they could have taken that less well. But yes, there are inspirations in real life that you put in.
Would you be happy to do a reading from the book for us?
Yes, let's have a look. Right, so this is from the very opening of the book. Gosh, my copy's falling apart. That's what it looks like, and also sadly that's what it looks like as well. Right. Journey Guru review. Yao Sum takeaway Kaus Menin. Reviewed October. Best Chinese in town. Been coming here since I was a kid. Is best Chinese in town, bar none. Food is always excellent. Now I bring my kid, and her turn to get free prawn crackers. Can't recommend it too much. Johnny L. 1 star. Reviewed yesterday. Shocking service, bad attitude. Was disgusted at being refused service here. No good reason for that. Said I wanted to see the manager, and some woman said she was the manager. I'm taking my business somewhere else, and I reckon everyone else does the same. Duncan's Blue. Amy L., manager of the Yao Sum takeaway Kaus Menin, responded to this review. Responded 23rd of March. Duncan's Blue. Thank you for taking the time and trouble to give us feedback on your recent visit. As you know, we have previously served you, and any number of the times you informed us you'd been on the lash since lunchtime, even with those mysterious damp patches all down one leg. We would have served you again if it hadn't been for the impromptu demonstration of Cossack dancing. When you threw your arms out, you managed to knock over one of our younger customers and made her baby brother cry. This was the reason we decided we couldn't serve you on this occasion. So that's from the very opening, and obviously it's a slight rip-off of what happens on TripAdvisor, and people give you feedback, and sometimes it's legitimate and sometimes it's not. And I've had my fair share of when I've told difficult customers something they don't like, and they've given me an unpleasant review on TripAdvisor. The strange thing about that one is that a number of people came up to me and said, was I the guy who weed down his own leg in your shop? And I was like, why would you want to be that person? And also, you're not, because I know who it was, and they've never come up and asked me that. So
I thought it was a brilliant opening, and I think it really illustrates that, you know, your book, as well as being a wonderful read, it's heartwarming, it's really funny as well. And, you know, debut book, I know it was something that you want, you know, you've been working on for a long time, and yet when it then happens, Richard and Judy Search competition 2020, they picked you in your book. What do you remember that moment when you first got told it's your book?
Yes, I do, because it was just like an ordinary day, and I'd made an arrangement with my nephew, and we were going to see the new Bill and Ted film in the afternoon. And at lunchtime, you're pretty much like everybody. You get these calls, they're all crackly, and you think, oh, it's just somebody scamming me, or somebody, if you don't recognize the number. And this person phoned, and they said, can I speak to you? And I was like, oh, I don't know who you are, what it is that you want. And I nearly hung up, but then they sort of said, oh, you've won the competition. And the other thing is that John, who made that call, it was sort of like, it wasn't like, hey, you won the competition. It was like, well, you sort of won the competition. It was all very reticent from their end as well.
It's very sort of deadpan excitement
Yes.
for you.
So, but yes. And then years ago, there was a competition in this town where Ant and Dec came to the park, and they put this sofa out, and they go, anybody in this town, the first people on this sofa, you've won the holiday to Disney World or whatever. And this couple ran down and got the sofa, and later on they had to tell the couple they hadn't won the competition, and they took it away from them.
Oh God.
Because they had a criminal record. That was the reason. Apparently you can't go to America if you have a criminal record, because you can't get the visa. So they couldn't have the prize. And I was absolutely terrified during this phone call with John that this would happen, and he would go, oh, you know, this, that, or the other. And I was terrified they would take the prize away. And I kept saying, I'm fine, there's nothing wrong, I haven't done anything wrong. Please let me have the prize. So I was a bit pathetic, really. But yes, the other thing about the competition that surprised me at that point, and I think what John was aiming at, he was saying, you really are an author who doesn't have a book published already, and you don't already have an agent, you don't already have a publishing contract. And I said, no, I don't have any of those things. But I think the impression I got was that people entered these competitions and they had all these things, and it's not for them, basically. I suppose this is a good time to say to your aspiring writers who are watching this that entering competitions is a really good way to go. Other thing about entering a competition is that you have to enter it without any expectation at all, because that's how I entered this one. I'd entered loads of competitions before, never got anything. And some of those other competitions you have to pay to enter, which I respect, because judging and filtering through all these things takes a lot of time. But when you've paid like £20 and you don't get anything, not even a rejection, it's a bit. But yes, competitions is a good way to go. I think the Daily Mail has one at the moment, I'm not sure. Or it's around. Anyways, that's worth Googling. And they're always writing competitions all the time. You just Google them.
I'm really glad that they picked you. It's as I said, it's a really wonderful book. And one of the things I really loved about it, and I wonder if you actually do this, is the customers whose names you don't know, do you have nicknames for them?
Yeah. Yes, I'm afraid we do. Sometimes, like, I'm trying to think of 3 examples. The ones in the book aren't the real ones. We never call people Fat Gwyneth Paltrow or anything. But there are things like, let's have a look. Like, there's a guy who came in and he split up with his wife, and he used to come in and cry really, like, heart-rending tears, and we felt, oh, I feel so sorry for him. And then we found out that he'd left his wife when his wife had left him. So we said, why are you crying? Why are you crying about it? And his wife would come in and she'd be like, la, 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 or his ex-wife. I don't care, I'm rid of him. It's like, this is all weird. So we used to call him the crying man. I'm trying to think, who else is there? No, I can't think of anybody off the top of my head.
It's like almost on cue, my cat is crying outside the door.
Oh.
So he's like joining in with that nickname.
Oh, you should bring him in. You should bring him in. Like, we
made havoc, he would.
Would he? Oh wow. Yes, he did something. I'm sure that happens in all shops, because wasn't there a scandal once in a branch of, you know, if you go to some coffee shops or Pizza Hut and they say, I'll come back and collect my meal later on, and some guy had written Ginger Kid on the receipt, and when the kid came back in, he saw Ginger Kid, he wasn't happy. That's relatively. I really, whenever customers come in now, I always write down the colour of their coat, because if you say something like tattoos or nasal piercing or something, people don't always like that. And it has led to a few problems, because a lot of people have a red coat. So people have ended up with the wrong meals because they've got the same colour coat. So yeah, just try not to be too offensive when thinking about these names.
I think I recently read another book that was set in a library, and the librarian made up names for the customers. And I spent a lot of time working in libraries, and I feel like I missed out on something because I didn't do that. I'm like, that would have been so much fun to have come up with different names for the customers.
Yeah, but then in the library, they do actually give you the name on the library card, isn't
Oh, well,
it?
not necessarily, because sometimes they might just come and choose the computers or something like that, or read the
Oh,
paper. So you've still got those customers whose names you might never know, and like come up with like really sort of creative ways of, it's almost like where they would communicate with other staff to say, oh, do you remember, you know, the guy that always wore the fancy hat? So it was Fancy Hat Man or something like that.
yeah. Or like if you were a deerstalker, it'd be like Sherlock or somebody.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So they can be quite endearing and
Yeah,
fun.
not always cruel. They can be. It's just a shorthand, isn't it? I'm sure a lot of people say um, things about me I won't go into. But yeah, I've seen myself referred to as dumpy and things like that. So there we go. It's not to be offended by. As long, obviously, if you say something like ugly, spotty guy, no, don't do
No.
that.
No, definitely not. And actually, like one of the themes of your book that we were talking about before we started, it's like, I'm trying to remember, I think it might have been Joan. Joan was brilliant near the end. It's just
Mm.
so, oh, it's lovely. But just that idea of, you know, forgiveness and understanding and just being kind. I think she, in fact, actually uses, it says, like, literally, you know, like, be kind and, you know, I won't go into, I was just about to say something else, but it would be a spoiler, stop
Oh,
myself. But it's just really lovely and heartwarming when you've got those sort of characters that are looking to find resolution, looking to make the most out of things and learn and grow and all those sort of marvellous things.
I think a lot of it is about, when I describe, is it that thing that I think Tolstoy says, oh, listen to me, Tolstoy, about all happy families being happy in one way and unhappy families unhappy in their own way. But I don't think that's entirely true, because this family, the 3-generation family, the father and the grandfather who've lived and worked together for all these years, but don't talk to each other, and basically ignore each other and say things like, oh, tell your grandfather his tea's on the table, instead of saying your tea's on the table. Um, they weren't unhappy. They were happy in their own way. They just found this way to work around this peculiarity. In all families, I think all families have their own little thing that they can't discuss in this sort of like don't mention the war type way in 40 Towers. I mean, it's, I suppose if you think about some people, I mean, now this time where people are constantly arguing about one thing or another, and they will say, oh, I'm going to argue about Harry and Meghan, or I'm going to argue about Brexit or whatever. But you can still be a happy family within that if you just learn to avoid that subject. And even if the subject is, I don't like the woman you married very much, you can still work around it to a certain extent. You can all be kind to a certain extent, can't you?
Yeah,
Bit
definitely.
ambitious with those things, but yes, the Joan character is very forgiving of some quite awful things, really. I think that's the key. She's made her own peace by being that forgiving.
And I thought like that dynamic was extraordinary. The idea that they've managed to sustain that sort of Cold War characters of not talking to each other for so long. I mean, when you think, I always think things like that take so much effort to sustain. But then families are complicated. It's like the ordinary being the extraordinary. We all have our quirks, don't we? All families have all these sort of weird things going on.
Yes, the number of people have come up to me who say things like, me and the wife aren't talking at the moment. So it's just like, you say, oh, how's the wife? I don't know, we're not talking at the moment. And it kind of gone on for a few days. Usually, I think I've noticed at the average, it usually goes on for about a week. And then you just start talking suddenly. It's just one of those things you have to get out of your system. Yeah, and parents and children and door slamming and all this sort of thing. Families are strange.
It is part of it, isn't it? I think it's the close proximity that sometimes does that. Like, you know, if you're further away, you've kind of got a bit of breathing space, which makes, I think, a big difference. I did wonder, with all your marvelous characters, did you, when you got to the end of your book, did you find yourself sort of missing writing about them? Because I think a lot of writers talk about they're sort of with that person when they're writing about them. I don't know if that was your experience.
Yeah, sometimes you might walk along, you think, oh, so and so, no, so and so from the book would like that. If you see like
Yeah,
like a flower or something in a shop. So they do hang on. And part of the thing I was hoping that if this book ever got published, which it did, and I would write other books, which I'm hoping to, that it would revolve around the same community and people would appear. I would look at some of the supporting characters from this book. They might appear in another book as the main character, a bit like something like Tales from the City or something like that, where characters move back and forth from different books. And that's why sometimes I think I still have to keep in with these characters. I still have to know them, like, there's a bit in the book where these two old friends, Elaine and Joan, they haven't seen each other for many years. When they get back together, they just slot back in as if they've never been apart. And that's how I feel about these characters sometimes. Sometimes I'll be thinking about other characters I'm writing about now, but I still think back to them and think, perhaps they might bump into them in the street or whatever. So yeah, characters do linger on. I suppose if you're writing a thriller where everybody dies at the end, possibly they don't linger on for you and you just put them away.
Maybe that's why sometimes those authors aren't that great on characters. They're a bit disposable, aren't they? They've not put their heart in it in the same way.
Some of the characters in this book were destined for death, but I just couldn't do it in the end. I think J.K. Rowling cried when she killed off one of her characters in The Prisoner of Azkaban. So I don't want to kill my characters if I can help it.
Did you have a favourite? Was the one where out of all the characters that you were like, I love them? Or as well as that, like I know you said earlier about the book changing and you took out characters, I believe, from the where your original work, and they're the ones from there that you're like, God, I wish they'd been in the book.
Yeah, there are characters sometimes I think, and sometimes you walk down the street and you think, oh, he looks a bit like that guy I kept from my book. So you do think about them. In terms of the favourite characters, I can't have a favourite character. I love them like my children.
Yeah, I was going to say it's like children.
I do like Tony Blair the cat. I do like the whole.
That was hilarious. That really tickled me. I love that.
And he was based on a cat we used to have actually. He used to just get on the window and press them like this. Oh, hi, let me into the house, please. And you'd let them in, and they'd go, now can I leave immediately again? And then come and do the whole thing again, pressed up against the window. So and she was a nice, well, obviously she was a she and Tony Blair's a boy. Yes, so and the current book I'm writing, which I hope will see the light of day, it's a similar situation with a dog. So there's a dog this time. So yes, pets in books. That's what we should do more of. And
absolutely, I'm all for that. I love animals, and I'm really glad you just mentioned about what you're writing now, because the other question was from Susan. He loves Happy Families and wanted another book from you. So I'm like, do you still have stories you want to share? What are you working on? Can we?
I am working on something at the moment, which involves support somebody who appears in Happy Families, but it's their story. So there are characters coming back and you will see them. So hopefully, and it revolves quite a lot around the shop is still part of the story. So yes, it's not a complete change of scene. It's not a sequel, but some of the characters will reappear. So I'm looking forward to that, hopefully.
Was it nice what you just said, like same sort of environment, but looking at it from another character's perspective as different protagonist?
Yeah, it's a different time as well, because time's moved on since the events of that story. It is nice. I feel in a way it's a bit blah to write the same thing again, but I was so happy with these people and this setting. And the setting is very much based on where I am in real life. And when I talk to local people about the settings, they say we can see immediately what you were getting at and who you were getting at and the point you were trying to make, because that's part of the local scene. And I very much want to see the equivalent book written in the Suffolk area at some point, because I think sometimes there's so many books about Paris and New York and all this, but I never get to read a book about Ipswich or Swaffham. Is it Swaffham that's nearby? Swaffham?
Maybe. My job, I mean, it's dreadful. I've lived here long enough now that I should know. Probably, I'm going to say with semi-confidence. I imagine underneath the YouTube video, people will be going, didn't know this. We do have some, so like we've got an event in June with Esther Foyd, who's written books based in Suffolk.
Yes.
But yeah, it's just such a lovely county. And I'm really glad we could find out about what you're working on now. One of the things that you said about earlier about all the different parts of the book and the past and the present in the book, what was that like writing? Did you find that easy to go? Because, you know, it's not a spoiler to say to those watching that at different points you're in different timelines of people's story to sort of show you how you've ended up where you are in the present. Did you write that? How did you do that? How did you work that as a writer?
It was sort of written pretty much as it appears in the book, and I wrote the contemporary story, and I thought I write a bit from the past, and they linked up. And while I was writing it, I did think, if I just write all the current story now, and then write all the old story, and then slot them in, but it didn't seem to work. When I write, I find very much I have to write in the order that it appears in the eventual book. I know some people are really good, like I'll just do the middle now, and I'll do the end later on. I'll come back to the beginning. I can't work like that. There was a different feeling about the old story. And coming back, because I had a little flick through before coming to have this talk with you tonight, and I looked and I was amazed because writers, the people who are writing, you understand about the difficulties with point of view, and you're thinking, oh, should it be third person? Should it be first person? Should I be omniscient, or should I stay close to one character? And I was amazed that I just seemed to have done it. And when I was writing something else, I was thinking, oh, I won't be able to write this because it's all in third person, and I only write in first person. And when I looked at this, I thought, oh, but no, you don't. You do write in third person. So you've sort of done something, and once the story takes you up, you do what the story asks you to do, and you don't notice that you're being clever about it. It just sort of happens. So that's, in a way, amateur writers or aspiring writers, just go with your gut, really, to a certain extent, and you'll be surprised at what you've done.
To be honest, if I would find it really hard to write it out of the flow of how do you know when you said you sort of write it in that order, I would find it really hard to do like the end and then the middle, and then my head would just get really confused.
Yeah, people, I suppose that might be because thriller writers do the end first, and then they think, when they plan it, they know what the twist is at the end and everything that happens at the end, and they work their way back to the front. So I couldn't do that.
It's really challenging. But then we have someone like Lisa Jewell who just starts writing and she has no idea how it's going to end.
I don't know how she does that, because obviously she had that book last year where she wrote about how she writes her thrillers. My jaw was dropping when I was reading it. How does she? But again, she was like, "Yeah, I've only got 8 weeks left, but I'll write the remaining 2/3 of my book in that 8 weeks."
Yeah, I'll just wing it somehow.
But she doesn't wing it though, does it? It's still. I think it's
still really excellent. I mean, sometimes people work in different ways. I think she might like the sort of the deadline coming, that she's just got to come up with it. I just wanted to add, for those watching, Swaffham is in Norfolk. Someone watching is very kindly passed that information.
I'm so best now that I get Norfolk and Suffolk.
It's absolutely fine. But it's just been so lovely to chat to you, Jill. I wanted to finish, to ask you, what was one of the best things about being published and becoming what a lot of people, I mean, you're still a writer even if you're not published, but what was one of the best things for you when that happened?
I think the best thing was knowing that the story was out there. To know that people were reading my work. There was one time when I came here and they said, oh, we're going to do the talk now, so we need to set up the tech like we've done here. And I went into the phone, and the technician was there, and she said, oh yes, okay Judy, I've got a good level on your sound. Now Richard. And then Richard Madeley appears on the screen, and I'm like, Richard Madeley, I wasn't expecting you. So that wasn't the best, but it was like a surreal moment, because obviously most people don't get to have a one-to-one conversation with Richard Madeley, and you're trying to be all cool, like, I'm not excited that Richard Madeley is on this conference call, but really you are like, so yes, that was quite good. And obviously seeing your book, and because it was during lockdown, I didn't get to see my book that much, but people did tweet me photos of it, and that was always very nice. And somebody, Nick, who works with me, he was in the hospital, and he said one of the patients had my book on their bedside table, which I thought was lovely. Yes, I like that.
It's like making a difference to people and giving them that escapism, and it was so important during lockdown as well to have books where you could just enjoy a story.
Yes.
Really,
Yeah,
really lovely.
I'm not into the really deep metaphysical novels. I like a nice story, and also it's very important to me that pets don't die in books. So anybody thinking of writing a book where a pet dies, have another think about it.
In fact, slight trivia, Stephen King has a book where he does, I'm not even thinking about Pet Sematary, but in something else, and he got more letters having a go at him about that than he did from writing The Stand and what he did to the world. He got far more complaint letters about that. So yeah, we're very, very precious about our pets and animals, aren't we?
Can't have any of that. I'm not having any track with that.
It's not allowed. For those, everyone, thank you for watching. Those of you catching up on YouTube, as I've already mentioned, we have got a ton of Julie's books in our libraries. We're raffling a book signed by her on Saturday at Ipswich Library, and as well, when this ends, you're going to go to Julie's website, pick up a book there and buy that there if you'd like. That'd be amazing. I do highly recommend it. It's just such a warm, funny, fabulous read. If you want to know more about Suffolk Libraries and the amazing services that we offer as a charity, you can find out lots about that on our website. We've got lots of online author talks, as I already touched upon, on our YouTube channel. Do check that out. And, you know, finally, Julie, just thank you so much for giving us your time this evening. It's been such a joy.
Thank you for asking me. It's been lovely. It's on my to-do list. Number 1, write a book and get it published. Number 2, go to Suffolk. That's on my list. So
I love it.
One of them, but not the other one yet. So
we would love to see you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.